I worked in the radiology department in a hospital in Cardiff, Wales, UK, for about 3 years as an admin and clerical officer before getting a promotion working in medicine. During these 3 years, I saw a lot of things, ranging from patients dying in the MRI scanners to having patients have an X-ray for inserting a meat thermometer into their urethra. Nights always seemed the craziest. One time a patient came in with armed police after an altercation which involved a knife in the middle of the city centre, and it just so happened the person he was having the altercation with was having an X-ray too. This caused a second one right in front of me. Chairs were thrown, a trash bin or two, and then a wheelchair. So I've seen some things. I would start a night shift at about 7, then work to 8:30 the next morning. This was the standard night shift for our department. We would usually do 3 nights in a row before doing 4 days off. After the 3rd night, you were ready to sleep for a week. The strange thing was this was my first night of the 3, so I wasn't tired at all and I started off normal. I arrived at the department, took over from day staff, logged into my PC, and during this time we would usually set up our phones or tablets to watch movies or the latest TV series, as there was a lot of downtime between patients. Like I said, the first few hours were nothing that interesting, just your average run-of-the-mill night in radiology. Then it came to my break. Now, before I tell you more, I should probably explain the layout of the hospital. This hospital was the largest in Wales, and it's a teaching hospital and it's pretty old. Now, the best way to get from A to B in this hospital is through what we call the tunnels, or the catacombs. They consist of very dimly lit corridors, old abandoned rooms, tunnels, and other creepy, decrepit areas. The morgue is also found among these corridors, so it's not a nice place to be in during the day, let alone the middle of the night. But for staff, it's the quickest way to get anywhere. There's always been rumors and mumblings about strange things happening in these tunnels. Some people say they saw ghosts in an old-fashioned porter uniform taking wheelchairs to pick up patients. Others say they've seen shadows following them from the corner of their eyes. But one person has claimed they were attacked by a person wearing an old nurse's uniform from the 70s. This place is creepy even at the best of times, but for me, it never really fazed me. I've been down there hundreds of times before the worst experience up until this point, which was having a sluice pipe drip human waste on my head. That was itself a horror show. But tonight would be something altogether different, and maybe not even of the physical world. It was a very quiet night. I had been watching the latest series of One Piece in my downtime. Then a radiographer came to take over and cover for my break. I decided to go to the 5th floor where the sanctuary, multi-faith chapel, was located. On a night shift, it is one of the most peaceful places in the hospital. But to get there I had to walk through the tunnels to reach the nearest elevator. I set off on my journey, which would usually take about 15 minutes. I scanned my key card on the main entrance to the tunnels, then proceeded to walk through. 2 minutes in, I started to feel like someone was walking behind me. It being a busy hospital, and basically the tunnels acted like the highway. I didn't think anything of it. Suddenly I heard panting like someone was trying to catch their breath after going for an intense run. So I turned around to check and saw nothing. A bit strange, but thought it was nothing. Maybe just one of the pipes above my head creaking or a generator pumping. So I carried on walking, but I kept feeling like someone or something was watching me and was walking behind me. Out of sheer confusion and fear, I missed my turn towards the elevators and found myself in a large section of the tunnels that I have never been in before, littered with old stretchers, beds, hospital furniture and equipment. Some of this stuff was over 50 years old, maybe older, just left to decay in a dark, smelly, decrepit and dusty corridor. This was really starting to creep me out, because in all this confusion I realized I was lost. It almost felt like I had fallen into the back rooms. Everything looked the same. I could feel a tightening in my chest and could feel the start of a panic attack. I remember clutching my chest and running down a corridor, trying to find a signal post or something to tell me where I was. The sense that something was watching me got stronger. Suddenly, I felt something hit my arm in force, almost like someone using a baseball bat. I remember falling to the ground, pulling myself across the floor towards the cold, dusty wall and looking around frantically, trying to find an explanation to what the heck just hit me. Then something caught my eye. It was almost like a black mist with glowing red eyes. It was about 20 meters away from me, just hovering in the middle of the corridor. Was this the thing that had been stalking me the entire time? I got back up and sprinted. I ran down what felt like 100 different corridors until I found the housekeeper, a janitor. He asked me what was wrong because I looked pale, but I could barely get any words out. He then grabbed me by the arm with a firm grip and asked, "Did you see it too?" That was the last time I ever stepped foot in the tunnels. To this day, I heard rumors of strange things. I'm not sure what I saw that night. Maybe I was tired, maybe I was stressed, maybe it was something. Why else would the janitor ask me if I'd seen it too? What else was down there? Well, I can tell you one thing for sure. I won't be going out to find it. I work in a care home in the UK and work nights. I just thought I'd share a few of the ghostly stuff I've seen and heard, because the spirits at work seem to love to scare me senseless. I used to work evenings, and it started with just footsteps behind me, particularly when I was on my own. Then they started scratching my head and tapping it. I then changed to night shift, and certain spirits started popping up that all night staff have seen. A night about a year ago, I was walking down a staircase and had my right to a corridor that leads to a dead end. I looked down the corridor and saw a figure. She was almost glowing. She was so white she had no face and very straggly hair. She was peeping out of a doorway of a bathroom. I could only see her head and upper body. Although she had no face, it felt like she was watching me. I turned to call from my co-worker, but when I glanced back, she was gone. She doesn't bother me too much. She seems like a nice spirit, and I've never worried about seeing her again and haven't. Another spirit is what staff call the Shadow Man. He lurks behind people and in corners. He only gets very close to one staff member who I regularly work with. I've only seen him once in the front entrance. I froze and so did he. One night, me and one co-worker were cleaning in the corridor with all the living rooms. We were standing there having a rant about general stuff that was annoying us. For context, the spirits never like us being negative. As we were ranting, all the living rooms started really making loud noises all at once. I felt brave and told them to be quiet. I turned away from the noise, and this one co-worker told me about the shadow man that was behind me. I didn't look, so I don't know if he was the noise, but it quieted down because we stopped our discussion. But when we started it up again, it started all well. Other short stories would be me hearing a man shout, "Help me," with no man around, as we were in the corridor filled with ladies who were asleep. Another time would be when I was walking out to the kitchen and all the cutlery started banging around. I ran so fast and refused to be in that kitchen once it was dark outside. Another is the people that were sat in the chairs in our peripheral vision, but when we look, no one's there. Then there's the whistling that happens so close to us, but we have to pretend not to hear it because it feels really wrong. On another occasion, I was sitting in the staff room on my own and something said my name in my ear. I ignored it. Then when I'm in the laundry room, I can hear things in the corridor, like walking frames even when everyone's asleep. Another time, there was screaming upstairs and we couldn't find the source. It was like when we went back to one end of the corridor, it screamed on the opposite side, and then we'd be going back and forth without finding the person screaming. On another shift, we were sitting in the staff room at around 5 a.m, and there was a walking stick sound in the corridor. We went out to see if someone was awake, and they weren't. On one night, me and another care worker were doing normal resident assistance, and we're both working with one person. I suddenly start hearing banging noises, but my other co-worker couldn't hear it. At first I ignored it after my coworker said she didn't hear anything and summed it up to an overactive imagination. It then began getting louder, so I turned to my coworker and said that someone must be breaking in. She told me to look out the front window as there's a view to the main entrance, but no one was there. Again, I tried to ignore it. Whenever we left this particular room, we decided to go up to the corridor and then we passed the bathroom I previously saw the woman peeping in, but the door was closed this night. Suddenly the door starts banging really loud and shaking. We ran back down the corridor as we're scared and all alarms were on doors, so we knew no resident was awake. I still have no idea what was in that bathroom. There was another night I was on night shift again, walking down the same corridor with a staff member. We had done our hourly check-ins on all residents when suddenly we start hearing on a loop, "Help me, help me, help me," in a woman's voice. At first we think it's a resident and instantly start checking the rooms, but no one's awake and we can still hear it. It was after checking the rooms that we listened closely. Neither of us recognized the voice. We didn't leave each other's side that night. I left the care home temporarily about 3 months ago and can go back at any point, but it's so scary. I just don't know if I can bring myself to go back. I work as a security officer, and 2 years ago I was in charge of patrolling and protecting a big museum in Hesse, Germany. And I thought, hey, you can look at all the exhibitions without anyone standing in your way while earning money. Isn't that great? I loved it. Day shifts and the late shifts were always a blast. Control that all people were gone, blast music over the announcement system. As I said, it was a joy. But there were also the night shifts, and to be honest, I always had a talent to see things. A good friend of mine who was later involved in this story calls this the third eye. So, off on another night shift to this huge house full to the brim with weird stuff. The first thing me and my buddy discovered was a mumbling head. It was in a small space in the outer roof maintenance walkway which was pitch black. We didn't want to shine a torch there if it was just a blank space where you knew the noise was coming from. It sounded like a man speaking in a very muffled way, but sometimes you'd be able to make out words. Nothing ominous, it was always trivial stuff. But the creepiest part of the building was called the treasure chamber. One day while making rounds, the feeling of being tired was stronger than normal as I watched the treasures that were housed within the museum. I scanned the checkpoint badge and walked towards the last door in the room to scan the badge behind. There was something weird on my way, because at a particular painting, it looked like invisible tendrils were dancing around the area I wanted to pass. Nope. I walked backwards facing the scene until I was at the elevator and went to the security center. My coworker was quite confused why I was so pale. For context, I'm a 6'2" guy weighing 130 kilos. People say to me that I look like a human tank, so he wanted to know what happened to me. I told him the story and he went completely white. And he just went, "You saw it too?" He shared with me a story that basically the same thing had happened to him. He was walking past it when he just felt something holding him by the shoulder as he was looking at that specific painting. We unanimously agreed we didn't want to check that damn room again, and so I went off on my rounds. Nothing more special happened that night, just the normal stuff. Intruder alert inside of a room no one called, that really no one could enter from outside from. They'd fixed the damn thing nearly 10 times, and the alarm still only happened at night. Sometimes the announcement system started to play the recorded messages at 3 a.m. when no one entered it into the command, and the everlasting feeling of "you are not alone" pervaded in that building. I worked at a pub for a year and a bit. It was an old pub dating back to the 1700s and was rumoured to be haunted. I suppose, as are all old English pubs. At the end of the shift, me and my colleague decided to play a prank on another colleague who had said she was easily spooked. She was tasked with turning off all of the TVs for the night. There were 6 TVs in all, spread across multiple rooms and areas. As she turned them all off, I went along behind her, turning them back on secretly. My colleague then asked her again if she could please turn off the TVs. She was very spooked. We laughed and then told her what we did, and we finished closing up. And shortly after, I went to the staff area to grab my stuff and leave, which is just down the stairs from the main pub. Down the stairs are the customer toilets, the doors to the cellars, the stockroom, and the door to the staff area. To get to the staff room, you have to go through the door and walk down these narrow corridors with 90-degree turn corners. Thick stone walls, lowish ceilings. It was echoey, and I could hear shuffling noises, voices and footsteps of my two other colleagues down there. I walked past the manager's office, but no one was in there, and when I reached the staff room, which is the only place left, no one was in there either. I froze. I know I heard people down there clearly. I didn't play any ghost pranks on anyone after that. Nearing the end of my time there, I had enough experience to change the beer barrels. These were kept down in the cellar, and my manager took me down for the first time to show me what to do. We stood downstairs outside the customer's toilet, and she gave me the key code to the cellar door. I suddenly get this forgotten memory flooded back from my very first shift I had. It was when I was told to go downstairs to the staff area for the first time, and as I got to the bottom of the stairs, I bumped into a man exiting the cellar. Apart from me, I didn't know there was a cellar at that point, and as far as I was concerned, it was a customer area. I was completely unfamiliar with the pub back then. The man was oldish, very big, who had a long beard and wore a big coat. Honestly, he looked kinda homeless. I apologized for almost bumping into him, and he didn't even acknowledge me. We passed each other, and I forgot about it entirely, until I saw my manager put a key code into the cellar door and said, "Wait a sec, I saw a customer come from here before." My manager had a bigger reaction than I considered and was initially annoyed that I had never mentioned a possible burglar. Once I explained it was my first day and I had no idea it was a staff-only area, we discussed how it wasn't even possible for a customer to get into the locked cellars. There were only big beer barrels down there, so not really anything anyone could steal. Cold as hell too. I described the man since he was very distinct looking, hoping my manager recognized him as a customer. I'd certainly not seen him since that day, and I worked 5 days a week. When my manager heard the description, she said it sounded like the story she'd been told by the previous pub owners about the ghost of a man who supposedly haunted the pub. I kinda hope it was a burglar now. Otherwise, I've been face to face with a full-body apparition and didn't even know it. I work in a DV shelter from 2:30 p.m. to midnight, but I recently took an overnight shift from midnight to 10:30. During that time, I would see people walking around from my office. We have a window that faces the women's living area, and I would also hear walking periodically. But the other person on shift would be sleeping, and the only person we have in the shelter is wheelchair bound. During night shift, we do hourly walkthroughs to make sure everything remains locked and all doors are closed. When I'd hear the sounds, I would do a quick walkthrough and see nothing, hear nothing. Note, you can't get into the shelter or any of the main areas like the women's living area or men's area without a key fob, which only staff hold. Tonight I was on my regular shift with another person and ran to the bathroom, which is through 2 locked doors in the admin area towards the back of the building, and it's all lit with high-powered white LEDs. As I was in the bathroom, I heard walking throughout the halls outside. I knew it wasn't my co-worker, as every time a door opens there's a loud announcement over the intercom that sounds throughout the building. I stepped out the bathroom and immediately was met with a sense of dread. I'm not a fearful person by any means. I'm very logical and confident in my own capabilities, so I don't often get scared or anxious, but this time I felt like something was watching me, and very bad energy all around me. I ran back to our office where my co-worker was still sitting, and she said things like this still happen all the time. Apparently people hear knocking nearly every night, and female voices from the men's wing, which is in the complete opposite of the women's wing, and through more locked key fob doors. 3 different people said they saw a chair fly across the room. I asked my co-worker to show me the hallway in the women's wing with all of the bad energy and crazy things, so we started to walk there. One of the signs that's been hanging on the wall with a thumbtack since she started in September fell before we even got to it. Then a door opened in the hallway. Our client is currently not at shelter, so no one would be back there, especially since every other employee that was here earlier left at 6 p.m. We peeked down and nothing was open. No movement under the client's doors, nothing. I've heard some knocking, footsteps, doors opening, and movement out of the corner of my eye, but I don't want to claim it's paranormal if there's something else going on. I'm not an expert on these things either. Do you guys have any thoughts? I used to work night shift at a gas station. It was quite late in the evening, and I was getting ready to pack things up for the night as it was 10, when this old lady wobbled in with a really rough-looking cane. She looked at me and asked if we had a specific item. I was rather taken aback by her request, as this is a gas station and we don't stock everything, but dutifully I informed her that I would ask my manager. So when I went to ask him if we stocked this particular item, I still can't remember what it was for the life of me, I was told no. And when I went back to tell her, she was gone. I'd asked if they'd seen her, and they told me they hadn't. The next day, I was visiting my grandma, and she was showing me the obituaries, as one of them was a friend of hers. And among the list of the deceased was the spitting image of the woman who I saw in the gas station store yesterday. That's when I noticed the date printed on the obituary. It turns out this lady had died 2 months ago. I genuinely am curious what her ghost was doing asking me for this random item, and I wonder if she'll ever come back or if it was a one-time thing. I once had a guy stalk me at my job. He would come in and ask for me. He looked me up on all my social media and asked extremely inappropriate questions, begging me for intercourse. After I told him to never speak to me again because he made me feel uncomfortable and didn't understand the word no, he started waiting in his car for me when I walked out of work at night. We left out of the fire escape door due to COVID. That's where our screening room was, and he would wait for me to come outside. I usually walked out alone, since I was the only one closing in my department at the time. I would usually have a 6'3", terrifying-looking asset protection guy walking me out, or 2 managers would walk me to my car. I bought pepper gel and a pocket knife that I kept on me at all times. One night there was no one to walk me out, so I walked out alone. This dude was waiting in his car like normal, and he started to get out of his car. I was terrified because there was no one out there either. Everyone else had left. I took out my pocket knife and flipped it open. It's a rainbow knife that is extremely sharp because I would sometimes use it at the job to open freight boxes. I was seriously prepared to end this guy if he came after me. I held it out where I'd be sure he could see it, and he closed his door and peeled out of the lot. I was so scared that he'd follow me home, and I weaved through the back roads until I made sure I wasn't being followed. Thankfully, I never saw him again after that. He never tried to contact me, and I no longer work at that job due to poor management. I now work at a nursing home close to the middle school in my town, which is nearer to my home. Hopefully I won't have to deal with creepy customers, just goofy old men, and I won't have to fear for my life anymore. We aren't allowed weapons of any kind at a nursing home, not even in our cars. Luckily, I usually am left alone, and the CNAs don't really pay attention to us laundry staff. A few years ago, I used to work at a popular fast food restaurant. There wasn't much activity, but I had 2 experiences as I was working the closing shift one night when I had just finished handing out a drive-through order. To give you a quick layout, when you walk away from the drive-through area about 8 feet, you turn left and it's a straight 25 to 30 foot down the back door of the restaurant, passing the food prep area and dishes. Once you get to the back door, you can only turn right towards the back dry food storage room, which is pretty small. I started walking away from the window looking for my manager as I needed to ask her something. I turned the corner and start heading to the back to wash the dishes when out of my peripheral about 25 feet away, I saw someone walk from the back door to the back storage area. I thought, oh, it's my manager, let me ask her. I walked to the back and turned the corner, and no one's there. The only place to go is the roof, but no one ever goes up there, especially at night. I then realized I really only saw the mass of a person, but no color at all to insinuate they had clothes or anything. I walked back to the front and my manager was in her office the whole time. It wasn't super creepy, but it was definitely weird. There was another time I was closing with my friend and our manager. Our restaurant was under construction and they were remodeling the entire dining area, including the front counter section except the kitchen. So they added temporary walls behind our front counter to block off the entire construction area, and they only added a small door for us to access if needed. So we would not be able to see the dining area at all unless we opened the small door. Since we were the only open drive-through, it was super slow, and the dining area was pitch black, so I'm sure most people thought we were closed. All three of us were standing next to the manager office and talking, trying to pass the time, and it was really quiet as well. My manager was just about to start talking when we all heard 2 knocks coming from the dining area. We all just stared at each other and double-checked the drive-through window in case it was someone who came up to order. No one was there. My manager told my friend to go check it out, and my friend said, "Hell no, you go, you're the manager," and started laughing. He ended up checking and saw nothing or anyone outside. We were all a little spooked, but downplayed it to someone who probably went up to one of the windows to knock. I was working the night shift in a cinema. Although the cinema was and still is shiny, inviting and luring, when people visit I don't think they recall that where it is built was once a morgue for the bodies of people that were hanged just a few yards away. One night during closing shift, myself and around 7 other staff members did our normal screen, bathroom and confectionery checks to make sure all guests have exited. Each screen has nighttime CCTV, so it was pretty easy to spot anyone left behind. We were closing the main doors, and just as we were doing so, we heard a guest bathroom door give a long creak, as if someone was pushing it open slowly. We all looked at each other, assuming there was a guest in there, so myself and another staff member went to check it out. When we walked into the ladies' bathroom, all the loo doors were shut, bar the one at the very end, which was wide open. We checked it out and there was no one. We called building security to check the place out and it was confirmed there wasn't anyone. Very strange and very uncomfortable. Many scary things happened in that place, and I'm glad I no longer work there. In 2008, I was working in McDonald's and I was 17 years old, while cleaning the playpen with my shift manager who was also 17. No one else was in the entire lobby but us. Suddenly the music cuts off, and I hear what sounds like a little girl laughing, which then turns to crying, which then turns to screaming. I turn to my manager and she just says, "You heard that too?" Not a second later the music comes back on, but it's insanely loud, louder than we'd ever have it in the store. We both ran into the office. She checks the cams to see if someone maybe messed with the sound system, but no one stepped foot in the office for over an hour. Then we asked everyone behind the counter, and they said the music was fine and they didn't hear a thing. We just left it to the demon/ghost activity and asked to be taken off the night shift for a while. I worked at a gas station when I was 17 and was the only person on shift that night. A man came into the store wearing shorts and a jacket but no shirt. It was quite cold outside. He limped around the store muttering to himself, bought a coffee and told me to say hello to one of the regulars, let's call him Pam, and leaves. An hour later Pam came in, and when I was ringing up her items I told her that the guy says hello. She had a confused look on her face, so I tried describing the man to her. While I'm describing his face to her, she goes ghostly white, and I ask if she was okay. She says yes, but proceeds to pull out her phone and call her husband, and told him to lock the doors and call the cops and that she'd be home in 3 minutes, and rushed out. I don't know what happened after that, but it scared the crap out of me. I'm a manager for a restaurant that was built on land that used to be a military hospital. One night after I had finished all my closing duties, I was standing in the restaurant area waiting for my ride to come pick me up. It was dark and dead silent, and the next thing I know I see legs from just below the knee walk up to me. The pants were white and the shoes were high-polished military dress shoes. I look up and no one was there. Needless to say, I hightailed my ass out of that building and waited just outside the side door for my ride. I'm a shift manager at a gas station. I'm a woman in my 20s who's 5'0", and I get the attention of all sorts of creepy men in the middle of the night. One time I was talking to a customer, asking him how he was, and he begins to tell me about a fight he had with his girlfriend. I honestly don't care, but I'm in customer service all day, so I sit and listen, or better yet, stand and listen. I gave him some advice and sent him on his way, considering it's about 2 a.m. I didn't really think much of it, considering it's a common occurrence and there's nothing I can really do. For the next 3 nights, this man, who before the first initial night came into my store I had never met, showed up and would not leave without a full conversation. Mind you, this is during the times we live in today, so I'm not really trying to stand and talk to someone less than 6 feet away for more than 15 minutes. Despite it being the middle of the night, there is still a lot of work to be done. I'm on the 4th night, and I'm outside changing the trash bags in the gas station trash cans, as well as the ones directly out front. Next thing you know, there's that dude, the same one over the last few days. He starts a conversation with me, which is whatever. But whenever I try to lose them by turning the corner and collecting the bag for the next trash can, he follows me very closely. Then he tries to get me to look at something inside of his car. Eventually, I signaled my cashier through my eyes that I'm uncomfortable. Beforehand, we had talked about this guy because this is not a unique situation at all. So she eventually comes out and says that my other person needs to help me doing whatever, and I say my goodbye to the dude and I go back inside, which he did not follow me back into. The next day, we're looking out for this guy, and how damn creepy he is. Throughout the whole night, he didn't show up, which is awesome, but at 6 a.m., right before I was leaving and handing the keys off to the next manager, that same manager called me saying that there's a call for me. I'm not the only manager there, so they had to have known my name and asked for me specifically. I answer the phone. "Thank you for calling. This is Cassandra. How may I help you?" "I've been a regular customer of yours for a while now, and I'm calling to ask if I can go down on you if I give you 500. "What?" The guy repeats the same thing, and I hang up. In shock, I turn to my boss and relay the information. My boss, a middle-aged white guy, goes, 500? You can get way more than that." Needless to say, I don't work there anymore. My first job out of high school was working for a security company in my area. The place I worked was an old carpet factory that was being used as a warehouse now, and I worked the 3rd shift. The job was super easy, since it was a warehouse and there were no employees, so at night I was the only person on site. The place was known by other guards for being weird and for having paranormal activity. The area it was on and the building itself have experienced countless amount of deaths. It was built on an old Civil War battle group, and the building was at least 70 years old and had at least 10 people die there, all in gruesome ways. I've experienced many unbelievable things there. When making rounds, all we had to do was walk inside along the main wall, leaving the same door we entered through. One area I always pass was a door that led you to a single set of concrete stairs to a big empty room. used by maintenance when it was operational. The door was always left open because after years the concrete floor had shifted and you would have to force the door to get it closed. There were drag marks on the ground from where the door would dig into the concrete when it moved. One day, while making a round, I passed it and it was open. As we walked along the wall on the opposite end of the building, I heard a huge slam that echoed throughout the building. I walked back around and saw that the door had been forced shut. Another time, as I walked through the shipping, I had to walk through a pathway of stacked boxes that was around 6 feet tall and 15 feet long on both sides. As I walked through it at the end, a black figure around 3 foot tall crossed from left to right in front of me. I looked around and couldn't see any animal, and there were no footprints in the dirt around the area. Another time, I started my round and entered a big, empty part of the warehouse and could hear what sounded like multiple people talking back and forth, having a conversation, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I didn't think anything about it at first. It didn't hit me until a little later that it was 3 in the morning and that no one should be in there. I went back and didn't hear anything. I looked around and no one was there. I ran the security cameras and the place was completely empty. Around 10 years ago, I was working at a 24/7 IT help desk, doing an overnight shift. It was 3 a.m. and I go on break and head outside to have a smoke. I'm standing a few meters away from the building entrance in a mostly empty part of the large parking lot, as our building had around 300 employees working there during the day, but only a few of us at night. The lot had a few street lamps scattered about it, so I could see the whole space pretty clearly. I'm about halfway done with my cigarette, and in an instant the wind completely dies. The crickets stop chirping, the environment goes dead silent and completely calm. A few seconds later, I hear clear as day footsteps starting faintly from the empty section of the parking lot directly in front of me, walking towards me, getting louder. I'm in a well-lit, large empty area, and I can't see a damn thing. The footsteps get loud enough that it seems like whatever was making them should be 1 to 2 meters in front of me, but I can't see anything but empty space, so I nope out of there quickly. The whole experience only lasted about 10 to 15 seconds, and in the years I worked there, I never had anything like that happen again. My rational brain wants me to think it was a trick of the mind, and maybe it was. But if it was some kind of hallucination, I've never hallucinated like that before or since. What do you guys think? I work overnights as a janitor at an old abandoned gym that's being converted into a construction office/storage unit. So tonight I was working, and about 20 minutes or so into my shift, I hear a loud bang sound. It startles me a little, and I think nothing of it since it's storming really badly outside. I hear it again, and glass breaks at the same time, so I follow the noise and hear more loud banging and some screaming. I get closer, and I am led to a window in the back of the building. When I look outside and see someone outside the window, and the window is a triple layered glass and one-way mirrors as well. He continues to hit the glass with a chunk of concrete, and the glass starts chipping into little square pieces as he screams. Then Mort manages to get through the first few layers of glass, and then he gets pissed off when he realizes there's still more glass to break through. I tell him to stop and leave or I'm calling the cops. He starts threatening me, saying something along the lines of that he'll bite my kneecaps off. Finally, I get the cops on the phone and tell them what's going on. I'm waiting by the window with a big-ass wrench in my hand, ready to swing it if he manages to come inside. Not even a few minutes later, the cops show up and have their guns pointed to him. They get him cuffed, and he tells them some wild story, saying that he owned the place and just happened to lose his keys. I was working the night shift at a seasonal job at a retreat on Star Island in what's known as the Isle of Shoals. It's up on the border between Maine and New Hampshire. Literally, the border goes straight through the harbour. Star Island is owned by the Unitarian Universalists, which is a way of saying you're agnostic or atheist, but back when it wasn't okay to do so they made it look like some kind of church thing. Really, it's a big hippie getaway, but the actual Unitarian conference each year is only a small part of the actual season. The island is open to any group that wants to pay to organize the retreat there. At the time of this incident, we had 2 conferences on the island, a yoga retreat and a group of people who were into their 1920s. The latter group would hold swing dances and dress up in suits and things to match. Honestly, it was just historical cosplay. Working at night though, I never got to see them. The building that normally holds party-type events weren't the main hotel on the island called the Oceanic, so unless I was doing rounds to check that further side of the grounds, I never really went near the venues. But you'd see people trickle in and out, as most of them had rooms in the Oceanic, especially during a slow period. Only having 100 or so guests is actually pretty slow. The All-Star conferences held by the Unitarians get up to 500 people and the place is packed. So with that information out of the way, let's get to the story. The Oceanic is over 100 years old, and ghost stories have been floating around since it was built, and almost everyone who's ever worked there, especially on the top 2 floors, has at least one to share. My own mother even said she felt someone sit on her bed when she was completely alone in her room. That's actually pretty common. There's even a wing nicknamed Ghost Alley, but since it got renovated it's been quiet. So ghosts aren't exactly a new thing or even something someone would think is crazy. But as part of the night shift, I've never had to go up to the top 2 floors or any of the residences unless there was a fire, and there never has been. Part of my duties on night shift were to check the water supply for the Oceanic, which was fed from the island cistern through filters and stuff into these big tanks under the porch. These tanks held all the water from the main hotel for toilets, sinks, showers, kitchens, drinking, snacks, bar, literally all the water. The water was stored in these huge tanks, and part of my job was to check them, write down how much water was left in them and at what time in case of a leak in the above-ground pipes, and flip the switches to draw power from a full tank if one got too low. The easiest way to access the door to the water storage was through the kitchen, which had a door leading out to the area of the island occupied by the other workers called pelicans. Guests aren't allowed back there. You won't get in trouble, but you are discouraged from going there because it's where most of us went to wind down, and it's not really a good place for guests to visit. So I was going through the dining hall to get into the kitchen, and I saw a man about 5'10", wearing a fancy-looking jacket and button-down vest with a kind of bowler hat or some fancy shoes. He was an older gentleman, and my first thought was, okay, 1920s conference guest, but I noticed he was going through the open door to the kitchens where guests weren't allowed. I started walking faster to catch him up, saying, "Excuse me, sir, guests aren't allowed in the kitchen area," but when I reached the kitchen I couldn't see him. I thought perhaps he hadn't heard me. We get a lot of guests who are hard of hearing, so I went back out since that was the only place I could think he'd be. The 2 others were in a walk-in freezer and an office, and he was not the kitchen boss, so there was no way he'd be in there. I darted out back, trying to see if I could ask if he needed something, but couldn't find him. There's only one real spot on the island with vegetation cover, and that wasn't it. You really couldn't hide out there, it was bare rock. I thought maybe he'd loop around for some reason or I'd missed him by a second, and I asked some of the pelicans who were up late if they'd seen a guy like that, and they all said they hadn't seen anyone except me and my shift partner on our hourly rounds, so I shrugged it off and carried on with my duties. It was a cold night and I wanted to be out of the wind. When I got back to the desk, I asked my partner about the 20s conference, and he said they left that afternoon. Strange. Maybe this guy missed the boat and stuck around. It's not uncommon, because we do get some solos who just pay to stay for a long weekend. However, when the sun came up, and I turned the desk over to day shift, I went back through the kitchens to get downstairs and eat as much as I could before going to bed. On my way to the kitchen, I saw an old photograph on the lawn. The literal lawn area of the Oceanic, which has a bandstand and everything. It was a wide shot. It even showed the tiny, super old graveyard that's way to the right. I think some of the founders of the place are buried there. The graves are super old and eroded, but I kept looking at those graves because there was a man standing in the graveyard, a man who looked exactly like the man I had seen several hours ago. I honestly wasn't that freaked out. I was happy I had an answer to who I'd seen. I believe in ghosts, and that most of them are just visions of the past, like an old movie that plays randomly when things are just right. So I'd simply seen a replay of a man walking through the hotel and going through the kitchen when, maybe, the rules were a little looser. That was the only thing that I saw that summer, and it certainly made for a memorable paycheck. For the longest time, I worked at a 24-hour convenience store in a rather large city. I don't want to say where, just know the city has been here for thousands of years, so the land and the people on it go back quite a while. I had been recruited a few months ago, but had usually done day shift. There was a change in management, and I was kindly requested to transfer to night shift full-time. My job was all over the place. I had to man the tills, as well as do a whole lot of inventory. There was one area that always freaked me out. It was the basement. Ironically enough, that's where we kept all of our goods, which we had to transport up and down to the main floor via clunky old-style elevator. I always hated it. And there was the task that no one liked, which was cutting up all the cardboard boxes, and there are hundreds of them, just to dispose of them. It was a particularly quiet night, somewhere around 3 a.m. It was just me and this other guy who had gone on a smoke break, and I knew that if someone came in, as he was smoking just outside the front door, he would come in to watch them. And to make the most of time, and knowing I would have to stay early if the boxes weren't cut up and put in the recycling bin, I volunteered myself to go do this particularly tedious task. One of the reasons I didn't like doing it is because it had to be cut down in the basement, the dark, dingy level. You had to slice it up and throw it in the recycling bin in a particular way in order for all of the boxes to fit, because if it was overflowing, they wouldn't take away the waste, and nobody wants that. So down I went and started slicing up these boxes, listening to some music quietly from the speaker of my phone. I didn't want it too loud in case I was called to come up. So there I am, alone in the dark with my thoughts, thinking about what I'm going to make myself for breakfast in a few hours and then pass out because I'm absolutely exhausted from the day, and I can't wait for day shift to relieve us. That's when I heard something. It sounded like someone coming down the stairs. I instinctively look up, and then realize that no one had opened or closed the door. The door had one of these special devices attached, so that when it closed, towards the end, it started to close really slowly, and it hardly made any noise at all when it did. But even so, if someone would have come in, it would have taken a while for the door to close. So when I saw the door was completely still, I knew someone hadn't just closed the door. Or maybe they did but were standing at the very top for a while, which was weird and creepy at any rate. This is besides the point though, because when I looked up, not only was the door closed, but there was no one on the stairs at all. The steps though, kept moving down. The stairs were made of metal, so the reverberating sound was quite loud, and my eyes followed the sound with no body attached to make the sound. I was absolutely horrified. I was using a cutter to slice the boxes and dropped it to the floor with a clang, and when it hit the floor, the sound immediately stopped. I, spooked, ran upstairs and just sat outside the store while my co-worker was having his smoke. He asked me what happened, and I told him that I cut my finger, which was a complete lie, and that I didn't want to go back down there anymore. He just gave me a grunt, and work resumed as normal for the rest of the day. Thankfully, my co-worker took over cutting the boxes, and not a word was said about it. A few weeks later, I had nearly forgotten the experience and had passed it off as something that was just in my head. I had about half hour left on my shift and couldn't wait to leave. Just as I was cleaning myself up, I heard someone flush the stall next to me. I didn't think anything of it. There are only 2 stalls in this tiny place, and when I left, I saw the door wide open. That was weird. I never heard anyone come in or out. I tried to put that experience to the back of my mind too. Maybe the toilet just flushes itself when... Well, I tried not to think about it. The last and final experience I had is what caused me to resign. This was during a very particularly challenging time because the building next door was having some serious construction done to it, and so we had all of the work people come in constantly for their lunches. The overnight staff came in as well, which was nice as there was someone to talk to, and as I was just about halfway through my shift, at a particularly dead time in the shift, I was restacking chocolates on the confectionery aisle. That's when I felt someone tap my shoulder lightly and say, "Angie." I turned around. It wasn't a surprise anyone knew my name. People had been here enough times to know my name, and it was printed on my name tag. So I turned around, expected to be greeted with a customer, but saw absolutely no one. Now, I was in the middle of the aisle, and there was no conceivable way anyone could have run anywhere without me noticing them or hearing them at any rate. I asked my coworker if anyone had been in for the last few minutes, and he told me no. He was standing at the front door smoking, as usual. And so, I really didn't know what to say. It left me with a chill up my spine and an intense feeling of dread. I asked him if he was sure that I just felt someone tap my shoulder, and he told me that happens all the time. He straight up said, "Yeah, this place is haunted as hell. You should have heard the stuff that some of the other guys have had happen to them." I didn't really know what to say. I just kind of nodded politely and pretended I wasn't buying any of it, despite the fact it had just happened to me. I put in my 2 weeks' notice a few days after, unwilling to let the spooks or whatever it was play their games with me anymore. And I now work at a far less haunted establishment and have yet to have any paranormal experience, and I am all the better for it. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. If you did, it would mean a hell of a lot to me if you would drop a like and subscribe. And if you made it to the end and aren't subscribed yet, well, that would be nice. I hope you enjoy these videos, and I make them every week. Anyway, that's it from me, guys. Thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen, and if you like more stuff, you probably appreciate this video, so why not check it out? Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.